Good morning. I want to welcome everyone to our second budget hearing of this subcommittee for fiscal year 2022. Secretary Vilsack, welcome back. This is not your first time before this subcommittee, and we're glad to have you here today. I also want to welcome Mr. Rapp. Thank you for being here. The Department of Agriculture is often referred to as the People's Department. The activities of the department are vast and affect every American each day, from important nutrition programs to programs that support rural America. I want to ensure that you have the resources you need to continue this vital work. The total budget request for USDA includes significant increases across the board. Total budget authority is $23 billion, which is an increase of almost $3 billion. And I'm pleased that the budget focuses on addressing climate change and finding ways to coordinate these climate activities across the department. I look forward to discussing these initiatives and how the subcommittee can play a role in this critical issue. Our farmers and ranchers are the most productive in the world, and I'm pleased that the budget continues to invest in programs that support them. Rural development includes significant increases from broadband to housing to water and wastewater infrastructure. The COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted the digital divide in rural America. These areas of the country must have reliable and fast internet service, and I look forward to hearing how the department will continue to invest in broadband infrastructure. One issue I know that is important to both of us, Secretary Vilsack, is ensuring that the staff at USDA have the resources they need to do their jobs. I know hiring has been an area of difficulty within the department, and I'm pleased to see increases for many agencies to hire additional staff. This is something that we will be looking at closely as we draft our bill this year. I was pleased to see the department withdraw the very harmful SNAP broad-based categorical eligibility rule this week. This rule would have removed millions from the SNAP program, including thousands of low-income Wisconsinites. Thank you, Secretary Vilsack, for protecting these vulnerable citizens. I would be remiss if I didn't highlight one disappointing aspect of this budget. The funding for the Dairy Business Initiative is expanded to include other agricultural sectors. I worked hard to get this program authorized in the Farm Bill and funded through this subcommittee. This initiative has been a lifeline for Wisconsin dairy farmers who continue to struggle. I hope we can continue to work together to advance this important work and find ways to include other farm sectors without compromising the vital work this program has provided for the dairy industry. Again, thank you for being here this morning. I look forward to your testimony, and now I'll turn the time over to Ranking Member Hoeven for any statement he may have.
Thanks, Chairwoman Baldwin. Welcome back. Secretary, good to see you again. Appreciate your work on behalf of our farmers and ranchers, and obviously many important programs. And, you know, it's amazing. As you know well with your background as governor and then 8 years as Secretary of Ag and now Secretary of Ag again, and working in the industry, it's amazing. It's such a big, diverse farm and ranch country that we have with so many different types of products we produce, food, fuel, and fiber, that, you know, there's always a challenge out there, right? I mean, we fight our way through bad weather and, you know, the trade negotiations and low commodity prices, and then we get to the point where we're selling some product globally and prices are better, and then, you know, in parts of the country like my state and out west, we got just incredible drought. So they're just always challenges. But, you know, it's so important because our farmers and ranchers provide the highest quality, lowest cost food supply as well as fuel and fiber to this nation and the world. And we have the benefit of all these small businesses across the whole country and farming and ranching. They're sophisticated, and ours are the best in the world. But we've got this amazing network that employs directly or indirectly something like 16 million people, and we can never take that for granted. As you look across other industry sectors, you see incredible concentration and how hard it is for a lot of small businesses to stay in business. So we really do have a calling there for those of us that work in agriculture to support that great network of men and women in farming and ranching that do so much for us every single day. Every American benefits every day from the highest quality, lowest cost food supply they produce. And so when we're talking farm policy, we're talking about good farm policy. We're talking about something that benefits every American every day. And I appreciate your work, and I know very well that you understand that. And so it's good to have you here to talk about, the things that we need to do on their behalf. In recent years and prior and up into the pandemic, USDA has provided more than $124 billion in assistance, but there's about $60 billion of that remains unobligated today, and so we should talk about that today. And I have to be right up front telling you that I am very concerned about the administration's $6 billion overall. Excuse me, I'm used to saying billion. $6 trillion overall budget proposal and $3 trillion tax proposal. And a lot of those tax increases would be very adverse for farm and ranch countries. So, or at least a lot of the proposals out there, okay? And so I'm very concerned about those things as well. That being said, I know you're an advocate for the farmer and rancher, and I appreciate that and look forward to our discussion today. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Senator Hoeven. Now we will turn to the testimony of Secretary Vilsack. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Senator Hoeven and members of this committee. Normally when we come to a budget hearing, we talk about numbers. As the chairwoman indicated, this is a budget of roughly almost $24 billion, with an increase that is primarily a result of increases in research, rural development grants, and personnel costs, and a rescission, not taking a rescission on WIC. But I would like to shift your attention for just a few minutes on the 5 significant challenges and big ideas that we are currently grappling with at the department, and I think American agriculture and rural America continue to grapple with. First of all is the challenge of what we can do at the department to fully take advantage of the opportunity that climate change presents. While we often talk about the challenges that climate provides to American agriculture, I think there are tremendous opportunities for American agriculture to expand income production for farmers, ranchers, and producers if we do this right. And I'm excited about that opportunity, and that's one of the reasons why this budget does contain a number of priority areas that are focused on climate, everything from climate hubs to increased research to a civilian climate corps and alike. The second big challenge, obviously, is an equity challenge. We obviously are dealing with a circumstance where gaps have grown between socially disadvantaged producers and other producers in this country, and also gaps that have grown in terms of communities. We know that there are areas of persistent poverty in this country. Roughly 380 counties in this country, and all parts of the country represented by the senators on this committee, have seen persistent poverty, where poverty rates have exceeded 20% for a significant percentage of population for over 30 years. And the challenge of this department is to try to begin to close the gap by addressing the inequities that have existed. That's why you'll see efforts in our rural development area of Strike Force, and why we are looking at ways in which we can increase, for example, resources to historic black colleges and other minority serving institutions. Another big challenge is an ERS study came out recently that indicated that 89.9% of farms in the country today, 89.6% of the farms in the country today do not generate the majority of income. When you have nearly 90% of farms not generating the majority of income for those who work the farms, I think it suggests the need for us at the department to look for more markets, better markets, and newer markets. And we are really focused on that initiative in the department. It's one of the reasons why we're focusing on expanding processing capacity, why we're dealing with the issue of consolidation and its impact on prices, and why we're looking for more open and transparency in our markets. It's why we're investing in local and regional food systems, and why we're looking at ways in which we can continue to promote exports. Certainly good news today that appears a negotiated 5-year hiatus on the Airbus and Boeing set of tariffs, which will certainly be good news for American agriculture. We will continue to work with the USTR and continue to look for opportunities to expand more new and better markets. Then there is the issue of food insecurity. We often talk about food insecurity in this country, as we should, when 43 million Americans are currently receiving supplemental nutrition assistance. But we need to also talk about nutrition insecurity. The fact is that 70% of adults in this country are overweight. 60% of us have at least one chronic disease, most of which is tied to diet. 40% of us have 2 or more chronic diseases, and we have a disproportionate number of our young people who are grappling with the same kind of challenges and will take those challenges into adulthood where they may not be as productive as they potentially could be. So as we focus on fully funding WIC, as we look at ways in which we can expand summer EBT programs, we also need to make sure that they incorporate a nutrition element in those programs. And then the final challenge we face, and I appreciate the Chair raising this issue, is the issue of staffing. We were confronted with a department that had seen significant reductions in staff across the board. I will tell you that I think, notwithstanding the fact that there may be concerns about the allocation of resources and the obligation of resources, some folks at USDA are working 2 and in some cases 3 jobs because of cuts. And so we have made an effort to accelerate staffing, and in this budget obviously increases and requests additional assistance from this committee and from the Congress to be able to adequately staff so we can do the work that you all want us to do. And in doing so, improve the morale. When I left the department in 2017, the Department of Agriculture was rated by one of the nation's business magazines, and it was Fortune or Forbes, as the 263rd best place in the country to work. And that was not just at government entities, that was all places to work. We were proud of that. We were in the top 10 of best places to work in the federal government for large agencies. Today, we are not. We are probably next to last in terms of morale. So we have some work to do, and I think increasing staff will go a long way, as well as dealing with appropriate telework policies and a return to work policy that makes sense given the new normal that we now face following the pandemic, may go a long way to improving morale. So I look forward to talking about these challenges and these opportunities, Madam Chair and members of this committee, and I look forward to the questions that you might have today. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. I'm going to just start with the 30,000-foot question. Mr. Secretary, the budget request for the Department of Agriculture is ambitious, and I'm pleased to see increases for many agencies that have been stagnant for years, the budgets. You mentioned staffing. Could you dig a little deeper and tell me what your priorities are with these agency increases in the overall budget?
Madam Chair, I would start with rural development. I mean, the reality is that we have several customer-facing mission areas, and rural development is probably one of the key ones. And if you don't have people on the ground in these communities, in these states, knowing what's going on, as Senator Hoeven indicated, we have a very vast country with lots of different challenges in different parts of the country. He may be dealing with drought, and I think Senator Hyde-Smith is probably dealing with floods. So if you would be more than happy to give him some of the water that you're currently dealing with, and he'd be more than happy to have it. And so rural development is key, and we have a very large increase so that we can increase staffing on the ground. Roughly 320 of the FTEs that we're requesting would go into states to be able to manage the various programs that we have. So that's one area in particular. You know, I think it's important for us to continue to find ways in which our folks at NRCS, who are also customer-facing, have adequate resources. There's a lot of work we can and should and ought to be doing on the ground, and there are no better problem solvers, I don't believe, in all of government than the good folks who work at NRCS. There just aren't enough of them. And if we're really going to be serious about climate, that would be an area where I think you'll see continued interest. I could go through the entire organization, but I think you get the point.
Yes, indeed. I do want to speak to in a little more detail the issue I raised in my opening statement. Wisconsin has some of the nation's top-notch rural entrepreneurs who have wonderful ideas about how to grow their businesses and contribute to economic resiliency in their communities. And I've been proud to work in partnership with the Center for Dairy Research and Wisconsin Cheesemakers Association to support this key part of our state's economy through the dairy business innovation initiatives. I was surprised that the budget proposed opening the scope of this initiative well beyond dairy. The success of this approach, in my opinion, is precisely that it helps experts and entrepreneurs in the same field to connect and benefit from one another's know-how, and then use that to launch great new ideas. It is successful because of its focus specifically on dairy. So in my opinion, it is imperative that the dairy business innovation initiatives remain robust and focused as they are on dairy. Will you commit to continuing the success of the dairy business innovation initiatives by preserving their focus and their resources specifically to dairy?
Madam Chair, to a certain extent, I hope that you understand and appreciate that what we've done is actually a compliment to you and to the idea that you had for the dairy industry, which is the $18.5 million that we've currently obligated. There's still a bit more yet to be obligated. It actually has been a successful program. And so successful that we think there are opportunities for other aspects of agriculture to benefit from that approach. I would say that we have resources in the Build Back Better effort at USDA that will provide additional resources that could be made available to the Dairy Center without necessarily changing what we are proposing in the budget. In other words, I think there are additional resources outside of the budget through the American Rescue Plan and other programs that could be made available as the dairy industry identifies additional opportunities where resources could be available. So it's a great idea, and I think it should be, frankly, expanded. So that's an unusual disagreement we might have.
Well, I certainly take the compliment that this is a very good approach. I would argue again that because it's so focused, and we can hopefully replicate it in areas, and I would ask you what other areas of agriculture and the rural economy do you envision being a good fit for this approach that we've used?
Well, literally any part of agriculture that has waste product that could be converted. Part of what I think is a response to climate, what a response to rural development is creating more revenue streams for farmers. And one way to do that is by conversion of waste and biomass into a variety, not just fuel and fiber, but also a variety of other products. And I think these kinds of innovation centers could give rise to an enormous number of new products and new manufacturing. And that's why the American Jobs Plan, which contains resources as well for bio-based manufacturing, would be a good idea as a complement to the innovation centers that you've put together.
Thank you. Okay. Senator Hoven.
Thank you, Chairman Baldwin. Mr. Secretary, thank you for announcing that you'll get both the quality loss adjustment out in the full amount, WIP plus at the 90% level. I appreciate that. Appreciate the work that you all did with us on the funding to do that. And I would, very important for our farmers and ranchers right now, just ask your assurances that it will be out soon and that you have your FSA folks on the ground ready to go and get it delivered.
They are ready to go, and Senator, we're hopeful. There are several states that received specific state allocations of resources under those programs that if they don't fully utilize those resources, then that money will return, and that could potentially get that WIP plus number up to closer to 95%. Good.
That's good to hear. And again, thank you on that. I really appreciate it. The other request I have for you is if we could get acting RMA Administrator Flournoy out to North Dakota. I'd like to have him take a look at the drought, and I think that would be helpful for our farmers to get it, and ranchers, to get a chance to see him out on the ground, taking a look at things so they know he's on top of it.
I will convey that message.
Okay, thank you very much. On the COVID relief, I brought it up in my opening comments. As I said, a lot of that has been unexpended, particularly out of the American Recovery Act. Can you give me some, just a kind of overall estimates as to how, that's going to go out and where you're at in the process?
Well, today we're announcing somewhere between $3 and $4 billion of additional announcements. The biofuel industry, the dairy industry, contract growers, organic producers, small meat processing capacity facilities, and some other areas I'm not getting off the top of my head right now, but somewhere between $3 and $4 billion of assistance and help is going out today. We're going to have additional announcements. Senator, the reason why it's taken a while is that there are literally 41 different groups of folks we're trying to help that weren't helped adequately or completely during the initial stages of COVID relief. So, for example, the biofuel industry didn't receive any assistance despite the fact they got hit pretty hard by both the trade issues and the pandemic. The dairy industry, working to mollify the impact of purchasing cheese for the cheese box for the box program, created a distortion in the cheese market that created a problem for some dairy producers in terms of adequacy of pricing. So we're trying to basically identify those groups that have not received help or received inadequate help and trying to get resources out. So I think by the end of this summer, you will see a multitude of announcements similar to what we made today and similar to what we made over the last couple of weeks as we roll out these programs. And I think you'll be satisfied that we're trying to provide as much help as possible to as many people as possible.
The biofuels industry is a good example. We had included authorizing legislation in order to help them. As you said, that hadn't happened yet, so you designing that program does show you working forward on that issue.
It happened. We announced it today.
Yeah, appreciate that. Cattle, we've got to do more for our cattlemen. The concentration in the processing end is too high. We need more pricing transparency, more competition. Our cow-calf guys need some help here, and that means both DOJ finishing up, their study on market concentration, and I hope that you're interacting there however best to do it. I know you're a trained lawyer, so you would know how to do that, but we need some help there. And then we need some help, hopefully legislatively as well as through USDA. It's just, these guys want more transparency, they want more competition, and then as you mentioned, the access to processing capacity, not only making sure the supply chain's working in terms of the existing industry, but getting more of these options out there for beef slaughter and other animal processing.
The spring regulatory agenda did indicate our desire to strengthen packers and stockyards to begin that process, to draw bright lines and clear lines in terms of what is appropriate and what is not. Certainly agree with you in terms of price discovery, and one way of getting price discovery is by having more processing capacity and more processing facilities getting more data and information. I think you will see over the course of the summer that we have a pretty unique approach to this that I think will result in significant expansion of processing. I think it will create, as you as a former governor will appreciate this, I think there's opportunities for us to leverage the federal resources with state economic development resources to create a variety of processing options, utilizing a unique partnership between federal, state, and local government, the private sector, and even the nonprofit sector that's very interested in this. So I think you're going to see a lot of activity in this space in the next couple of months.
Good. We look forward to working with you on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Hoeven. Pleased to be joined by the full committee chairman, Senator Leahy.
Thank you very much, Senator, and thank you for having this meeting. And Secretary Vilsack, it's a pleasure to see you before the subcommittee. We've worked closely together for years, and between this committee and the other committee I serve on, the Agriculture Committee. I was glad to see the administration's budget for USDA reflects the president's commitment to our rural communities. And obviously, that's something you and I have discussed many times over the years. But these communities were really hurt badly during the past year, but it also further exposed the weaknesses and injustices that our consolidated food supply chain is long contained. We can do better. I was pleased when I heard our governor announce yesterday, now that we have 80% vaccination in our state can now fully reopen. Ironically, it's 80.2 was the as of yesterday morning. For those of us, Vermont has one area code, it's 802, and we have 80.2 for our vaccination. But if I could be parochial a bit, something unusual in Appropriations or Agriculture Committee for members to be parochial, I've supported initiatives to improve farm viability. Our experience in this customized business support has proven very effective in regional supply chains and generating jobs, increasing business investment in rural communities, something we need. Your announcement last week related to food chain resiliency was very welcome. Recently, I sent a bicameral letter to the department with 49 other members of Congress, including members of this subcommittee, encouraging USDA to dedicate a portion of your significant pandemic relief authority to this important work. So let me welcome your thoughts on this request, and what role can customized business technical assistance for producers play in the President's Build Back Better agenda?
As part of the Build Back Better agenda that we announced last week or 2 weeks ago, Senator, we included a aggregation and distribution section where we provided resources, part of which will create that kind of opportunity for technical assistance. In addition, the American Rescue Plan calls for additional opportunities, especially to connect socially disadvantaged producers to more technical assistance. This is an incredibly important component to building a local and regional food system, is making sure that people have access to information about government programs that can be of assistance. There are many ways in which the Department of Agriculture can help local and regional producers. There are microloan programs. There are food hub support. Some of what we'll be doing with the Build Back Better effort is to be supporting and investing in more food hubs, which will provide for an aggregation of locally produced food. We're also tying some of our procurement decisions into providing assistance and help. Most recently, we announced a emergency food buy, a portion of which is being directed to small and mid-sized producers and local and regional food distribution systems, as opposed to the large-scale distribution systems, as a way of diversifying where we do our business. All of this is designed to provide support and help. So technical assistance, critically important. Market access, critically important. Access to capital, also important.
Well, thank you very much. And coming from Vermont, you know that I'm going to talk about the dairy economy and producers, not only in my state, but throughout the Northeast. We see milk prices staying very low, and feed, labor, farm equipment, energy costs have all gone up. We're losing farms at a number that we once thought unthinkable in our state. Understanding your department is working on a number of initiatives aimed at helping small and mid-sized dairy farmers. Can you give me an update of when producers in a state like Vermont can expect such this much-needed relief?
Senator, today.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, we announced today assistance for dairy farmers in 3 areas. One, a dairy donation program that is designed to defray the cost of donated milk. Oftentimes in disruptions, it's very difficult for farmers to be able to donate because there's a processing cost that would increase the loss that they would be incurring. So with this dairy donation program, we're eliminating a lot of that loss element. Secondly, we've increased in providing a supplemental margin coverage payment, several hundred millions of dollars that will go out to small and mid-sized dairy producers under that program. And then third, as I explained to Senator Hoeven before you came, we are in the process, or perhaps this was to Madam Chair, we are creating a program to help reduce the differential that occurred between Class 1 and Class 3 milk pricing because of a disproportionate number of purchases of cheese during the food box effort. That distorted the market, and it caused a lot of harm to smaller producers. We're putting resources in to reimburse those producers for some of the loss that they incurred, and that was announced today.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate that. I just made a note to myself in 40-some-odd years asking questions of cabinet members about when are you going to do something. It's the first time I got today, and so that's going in my journal. Thank you very much.
We were all a little startled, actually, on that one. Yeah.
But I accept it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's amazing what scheduling a hearing can do.
Yeah, that's.
I would have scheduled it 2 weeks ago, 2 months ago, had I known. Right.
That's secrets in the bag.
Senator Moran.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Secretary Vilsack, welcome. A couple of things I have on my list to ask you about, but something you said a moment ago about the announcement of the package that I learned about this morning. One of the things first of all, I compliment. We worked hard to get biofuels included in this release, and I appreciate you taking the lead to get that accomplished. Secondly, though, one of the things that I think is missing from that package that I think is important, but you mentioned it, and that's small meat processing facilities. I have two pieces of legislation that I've worked with Republicans and Democrats to get enacted as part of COVID relief. One is to have compensation for the overtime fees for federal inspectors at small plants with the difficulties we had, particularly early on in the meat processing circumstances with COVID. A lot of people turned to that small hometown locker plant, the few that still remain, have side of beef process. And the problems that they were facing with the increased volume is the need for federal inspectors and overtime, and it's hugely expensive to go beyond 40 hours. So this legislation would have USDA compensate for that circumstance out of those COVID relief funds. And secondly is a bill that's called Ramp Up. This may have been with Peterson in the House, but we worked together to see if we could increase the size and scope of grant access to dollars to help increase the size and get yourself to a point, get the meat packing plant to a point in which they would be licensed to sell beef across state lines, meat products across state lines. And so I don't think that that's included in your relief package. When you mention small processing plants, the only thing we've been able to find is perhaps PPP assistance to those small processors. But I may be wrong, and I'd be happy to have you or the team tell me what is in there.
You're not wrong in terms of what was announced today, Senator, but we do have in place a program that will do as you've asked be done. I think you sent a letter suggesting appropriate percentage reductions in the fees. I think our plan is to basically follow the prescription of that letter in allocating resources to small and very small establishments based on the percentages outlined in your letter. And I think if you look at our budget, what you'll find is our belief that the resources that have been provided, the American Rescue Plan and COVID relief plans, but probably don't fully fund that program for 5 years. So I think our budget contains another $44 million that would allow that program to be expanded not just for a year or two, but for maybe up to 5 years of opportunity for those small and mid-sized producers. So we may have already announced that, but if we haven't announced it, we're going to announce it very, very soon. So rest assured that's going to take place. I should have taken a note on your second point.
Second point was about grants assistance to get the processors where they can be greater capacity and operate.
And that's also forthcoming. In fact, I think, didn't we? We are going to make that announcement relatively soon. I will tell you that there's one challenge with reference to that notion, and that is these resources can be used to basically scale them up to the point where they meet the federal inspection requirements. in order for then they can enter into a cooperative agreement with us to be able to sell across state lines. The challenge is that we have got to maintain equivalency in terms of inspection processes, because otherwise we would significantly impact our export markets.
I share that view, understand the importance of that.
But it isn't, if it's not here yet, it's coming very soon.
Thank you. So I take the answer to my question as good news. Unlike Senator Leahy, the chairman of the Appropriations Committee, say today, at least tell me that it's in the works.
It's in the works, and I think you'll see it probably next month.
Mr. Secretary, I'd love to see your employees back to work in the FSA offices. At the moment, it's pretty much make an appointment or by teleconnection. And is there a plan to get FSA and NRCS offices up and fully staffed in person?
Currently, the FSA offices are at 75% capacity. NRCS. Yes. And NRCS is a little bit less than that. Here, we are working on a return-to-work plan, Senator. Here's the challenge. There are some people that are anxious to get back and now have the authority and ability to get back, and to be able to do so if they are vaccinated, obviously, without the necessity of masks and so forth. If they haven't been vaccinated, then they have to maintain social distancing, and they have to be masked under our policy. Some of the challenges, obviously, if you have to social distance, that creates an issue with reference to the size of the office itself. But I want to assure you that the work is getting done. And how do I know that? Because we've surveyed this. We've actually tracked the ARC and PLC activities and so forth to be able to determine whether or not we are on track relative to pre-pandemic work when offices were fully staffed. And we are exactly today where we were a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago at this time in terms of the work that's being done, which is pretty phenomenal under the circumstances. So the challenge is making sure that we're respectful of people that want to get back to work and of the customers we serve, but also respectful of the people that still have hesitancy about going back to work. So, and giving them sufficient time to make adjustments in their personal life, given the fact that they've had this new normal for a year, where they may have not had to have child care expense and so forth and so on. So we're trying to create enough flexibility to be able to do the job and be able to be respectful of concerns. But we're at 75% FSA offices, a little bit less than that in NRCS offices.
When you say new normal, are we never going to be back where the employees are all in the office?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily say that in FSA, but I think there are options in some of the other mission areas of USDA where we are actually surveying our workforce in terms of telework and in terms of space requirements. We may be able to substantially shrink the space requirements of USDA and save money as a result and provide greater flexibility and still get the work done. So I don't want to commit to every mission area, but certainly we will have the people in these offices necessary to get the work done for our farmers, and they've done a terrific job under the circumstances.
Senator Merkley.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary, and I'm going to try to hit 4 topics in 5 minutes with your help, starting with the watershed and flood prevention operations, WFPO. In the West, as you know, we're facing enormous drought conditions and more common, and one of the responses is to pipe our irrigation ditches. The result of that is we get more water to the farms, and the agreements are set up so it also returns more water to the rivers during the winter. Because we traditionally use winter water put into reservoirs, we have created the opposite of the natural cycle when there's more water during the winter in the rivers, and thus it creates problems for endangered species. This effort is a way to help use water much more efficiently. And it's a program where there's a huge backlog of irrigation districts that need assistance in doing this piping. Are you familiar with this program, and do you support investing more in this program to help address the efficient use of water in the West?
Senator, is this the watershed and flood prevention program?
Yes, it is.
It's $100 million in our budget.
Yes, $100 million in your budget, and that is great. That's the increase that is in the American Jobs Plan. In Oregon, we now have about $2.5 billion worth of projects in the pipeline. And I just wanted to make sure you understood how important this program is to water in the West.
Understood.
Thank you. Speaking of drought, the Klamath Basin, for the first time in 105 years, has no water for irrigation for the ranchers or farmers. And so your team has been very helpful in getting aid to the Klamath farmers, and I just wanted to see if you could give us an update on that.
It's $15 million designed to provide help and assistance to farmers who are, in essence, being encouraged not to plant and compensated therefore. In addition, NRCS has announced a $40 million effort across the country, which could potentially be used with drought mitigation adaptation strategies and resources that will now be available through EQIP.
Thank you. I really appreciate your team doing everything possible, because it's a massive economic disaster, and it's an environmental disaster. There won't even be enough water for a flushing flow down the river. Without enough water in the river, we're going to have a big salmon die-off. We'll have a big bird die-off because it's an key overflight area for migrating birds. So in all fronts, that would be helpful. Third, the Pendleton Agricultural Research Service Station.
I could still hear you, Senator.
I will. Oh, it's back. It's a flaw in the wiring here. Well, speaking of capital investments that are needed, here we are with this Columbia Basin Agricultural Research Center, which is key to our dryland wheat farming, and much going on, again, as we face changing weather conditions. But it's absolutely a place where we need more capital investment. Can you give us an update on the ARS capital investment strategy?
We have been expending about $1 billion a year and trying to upgrade over 90 facilities that ARS is responsible for. Candidly, Senator, we do need the support and help that's, I think, inherent in the American Jobs Plan that would provide significantly greater resources than you can provide in a single budget year to be able to address the backlog. I'd like to be able to tell you that we'll get that backlog done within the existing budget, but candidly, that wouldn't be a truthful statement or an honest statement.
And can you ask your team to specifically look at the needs of the Pendleton Research Station as part of this process?
My team is behind me. They're taking notes, Senator.
Thank you. Thank you. Fourth, Rural Energy Savings Program. This is a program that is low-cost loans that go to utilities that then can do low-cost loans for energy-saving retrofits. The beauty of this is it's lots of jobs in rural areas, and the products are virtually all made in America. So it's jobs in rural areas, it's energy efficiency in rural areas, it's on-bill service that utilities can provide. During 2020, USDA approved about $104 million in loans for 11 of these energy efficiency programs. The program is still growing as utilities become more familiar with it, and I'm happy to see that your budget funds this at a $10 million increase. Just wanted to draw your attention to it and ask you to keep it in mind, because it's a combination of smart energy policy and smart rural jobs.
Will do.
Thank you. Record with 7 seconds to go. Thank you.
Senator Collins.
Thank you. Welcome back, Mr. Secretary. As you are well aware, the potato industry is an essential part of the agricultural sector in Maine and is the economy in many rural communities, particularly in the northern part of our state. I very much appreciate that the department's budget would continue the integrated pest management program, but I am dismayed that it would eliminate the USDA's potato breeding research program. This program played a key role in the development of a new potato variety called the Caribou Russet, named after my hometown, I would note, that has boosted the Maine industry with its high yields and its resistance to disease. So I give you this concrete example because it's testament to the success and the importance of the potato breeding research program. The department received an overall 9% increase in its budget. So why is the potato breeding research program targeted for elimination?
It's not necessarily targeted for elimination in the sense that there is a significant increase in the competitive grant programs that we have at USDA for research, and would certainly, given the success of this research, would encourage folks to be part of AFRI, a part of that competitive grant process, or there's also a specialty crop research initiative that it also could qualify for. So I think our sense is that we want to begin to look for ways in which we support strong research, but try to blend it into our competitive structure, as opposed to specifically earmarking specific research projects.
Well, that's something we'll continue to work on in this subcommittee, I'm sure. Mr. Secretary, last year I urged USDA, obviously in the past administration, to include loggers in its COVID assistance programs. The department expanded the list of eligible recipients to include Christmas tree growers, tobacco farmers, producers of ornamental fish, but not those in the logging industry. So as a result, I headed a bipartisan initiative and secured $200 million specifically targeted for loggers, for harvesting and hauling businesses in the December COVID bill. I know that USDA announced this morning that this program and others would be implemented in the next 60 days. But I would point out that the program was signed into law on December 27th, so it's taken nearly 6 months just for loggers to be told that it could take yet another 2 months before they actually receive relief. And given their losses during the pandemic, this is a problem. Is there any way for the USDA to speed up the implementation of this program so that it doesn't take another 60 days?
We'll do it as quickly as we can within the resources that we have and within the legalities that we have to follow. Senator, I really appreciate the fact that that you feel that this has been delayed, but I think you have to look at all of the other activities and work that we've had to do at USDA, and under the circumstances and given the staffing reductions that we faced coming into this administration, I think our people have done a pretty doggone good job of getting things out. But I understand and appreciate your folks are suffering, and we'll try to get that relief. And I know the chair is also interested in this issue. She's probably talked to me about it half a dozen times. So we will make sure that we'll do it as quickly as we possibly can.
Thank you for that commitment. The chair and I worked very closely to get this assistance included. The third and final issue that I want to raise with you has to do with PFAS contamination, and I know you care deeply about this issue. Over the past several years, we've seen family farms in Maine affected by PFAS. In 2016, a dairy farmer in Arundel, Maine, discovered that the milk produced on his farm contained some of the highest levels ever reported for a PFAS contaminant. And so obviously he could no longer sell his milk. It also contaminated a public water supply as well. In 2020, a dairy farm in Fairfield, Maine, a whole different section of the state, found PFAS levels in its milk were 153 times higher than Maine's standard for determining whether it was fit for sale. So in both cases, this was the result of the use of wastewater sludge spread as a fertilizer on the farm. But this truly was no fault of these farmers, which are generational dairy farms. The USDA provides some support to farmers who have been directed to remove their milk from the commercial market through the dairy indemnity payment programs. But what the farmers tell me is that this is not sufficient to keep them in production, to keep them in business. So I would ask that you take a look at this issue. As I said, I know that PFAS is high on your priority list. This, too, is creating real hardship for our dairy farmers in Maine and for some of our water supply as well.
Senator, this is an issue that not only impacts Maine, but also can go, I can take you to New Mexico, where there's some serious issues there as well. I think the challenge for us is to, in the past, we've been basically providing indemnity for the milk that was impacted. I think what we're looking at now is basically indemnifying the farmers for the cows themselves. And I think that's going to provide more relief and the kind of relief that your dairy producers are probably looking for. And we're working on that. We're going to get that done relatively soon.
That's really good to hear. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Collins. Senator Tester.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's good to have you back. Secretary Vilsack, let's get to the important stuff right off the bat. How are your grandkids?
They're good. We had a baptism and a first communion over the weekend, Senator, so it was a good deal.
I think it's important to remember why we're here, right?
Absolutely. Thank you for asking.
Look, a conversation we've had in the past deals around consolidation in the meat industry. Last week, Grassley Rounds and myself dropped in a bill that creates a special investigator act a special investigator under the Packers and Stockyards Act that would be housed in the Department of Agriculture. They would have subpoena power, and they would be able to really put some teeth into, I think, the Packers and Stockyard Act for price discovery and ensure that there's transparency in the market. I am curious to know what you think about that proposal.
Senator, I think it's a good proposal. I think it is part of what needs to be done. Clearly, Packers and Stockyards, the lines need to be very specifically strengthened and drawn so that it's clear what is an undue preference, clear what is unfair practices, clear what the scope of work ought to be, clear what competition standard we have to reach in order to be able to have enforcement. I think that's part of it. I think price discovery is important. I also think, frankly, that we need more processing capacity. And you and I have talked about that, and I've talked to Senator Moran earlier today about this. We're going to continue to we are going to come up with a very creative way to significantly expand processing capacity in this country. So I think a combination of all those things very, very important.
I have some ideas on that, and I'm going to get to that in a second. JBS, as you know, was hacked. Paid $11 million to some people who want to try to destroy this country, and they're starting with a food supply, which is a pretty effective place to start if you want to know the truth because of the consolidation in that. Can you just give us an idea on what you're doing around that with either Department of Justice or I'm talking about the cyber attack on JBS?
Right. Well, the first order of business, I think, is to make sure that everyone in the food industry and food business understands the steps that they need to take to harden their systems.
Okay.
The CFIUS has basically put forward a set of standards or a set of guidance or requirements for hardened systems, and we're going to convene food groups to essentially make sure they understand and appreciate precisely what is required. Secondly, we'll be more than happy to cooperate with any legal investigation. And I think there's also an issue of this whole notion of cryptocurrency, which is outside of my area of expertise, but one that I suspect that folks in the Senate and the House need to be thinking very strongly about.
Well, I will tell you that concentration in the food industry and meat industry in particular in this case has been a big concern of mine, and now that the cyber criminals have figured this is a good way to screw up our economy. You control food, you tend to control people. That is a problem, and I appreciate the fact previously you said you're going to try to increase the small plants' ability to be able to be players in the marketplace. I just met, in fact, this last weekend with a person who's trying to set up a packing plant in north central Montana. Access to capital is a problem everywhere. Have you thought about potentially taking some of the funds that you got from the rescue plan or somewhere else? I'm not telling you where to go. You know where they're at. And potentially setting up a revolving loan fund with low-interest loans to be able to fund part of those? And if Moran already asked this question, I apologize.
The answer to your question is yes, Senator.
Okay, and do you have a time frame for that?
Well, I promised Senator Moran action on his efforts and his question in July, but Senator, actually, the $60 million COVID relief money is going to come at the end of June. The opportunities to help your small producers. So I've moved up the timeline for you, and I think you're yes, exactly.
Don't let Moran take my time, Dan.
Well, I'm sorry. I just had to get that in. I think this summer we're going to begin the process of identifying how much we think we can commit from resources that we have, Senator. It's going to be a fairly significant amount, and I think there are many creative structures that we will look to.
Good. So let me ask you about another one. State-inspected plants, been able to sell across state lines.
Here's the challenge. The challenge is basically getting them to make sure that they have the equivalency in terms of inspection. And the reason this is important is because we don't want to basically create chaos in the export market. If we have different levels of inspection with product crossing state lines, then we may have difficulty selling our beef and so forth overseas. So we want to help folks get to a point where they are equivalent.
So in a previous life, I processed beef as a added value to the farm. And I can tell you that there is more demand out there from these small processors than they can fulfill right now. And if you combined a low-interest revolving fund, which I think the department would end up making money on, by the way, over the long haul, with figuring out a way to be able to sell across state lines, I think, man, the Katie bar the door, there's going to be a lot of good stuff happening.
There's a way to do it. I mean, right now there is a way to do it. There are I think 8 states that basically have that capacity based on a cooperative agreement they have with the USDA. There's a way to get there. It's just not, but it has to be equivalent from an inspection standpoint.
Last thing, if you could take for the record what you think the potential costs for implementing the Meatpacking Special Investigators Act, and get back to me on that, I'd appreciate that.
Yeah, I will have to get back to you because I don't know the answer to that question.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Tester. Senator Hyde-Smith.
Thank you, Chair Baldwin and Ranking Member Hoeven, and I certainly appreciate our guests being here today and have enjoyed working with you in the past and look forward to continue to working with you. As you mentioned, Mr. Secretary, we have had tremendous flooding in Mississippi last week, in northern Mississippi, and in some areas we got 20 inches of rain in a 24-hour period. Beautiful crops that had just been destroyed that were very, very promising to a lot of Mississippi farmers. And we had rivers and creeks and streams, of course, that exceeded their banks. We had dams that gave way. We had levees that were breached. It was very unusual for Mississippi, but we had 2 rural water associations had to issue boil water notices. And of course, Mississippi State Extension Service is still evaluating the damages, as it's going to take a while to do that, but we can tell you it is tremendous. And my phone obviously has been blowing up with people saying, when can we get assistance for this? They're just panicking right now because it's hundreds of thousands of acres of prime cropland that's either got to be replanted or it's just going to simply go unplanted this year in some circumstances. But are you committed to ensuring that USDA will be a resource to Mississippi farmers and communities in recovering from last week's catastrophic flood in a timely manner?
Yes, given the resources that we have available. And I would say that there are some programs, frankly, where there is a little bit of money, just a small amount of money left that's unobligated. Which I think points out a larger set of issues with reference to our programs to help during difficulties. But yes, we will do what we can, both through FSA, disaster loan assistance, through NRCS with the EWP and debris removal, and certainly RD can be very helpful to communities that are dealing with wastewater challenges or community facilities that have been destroyed.
Thank you very much for that commitment, because we have some eager and nervous farmers and bankers. But there are a number of USDA programs across various agencies that really do help rural communities and individuals to better respond and better prepare to overcome the natural disasters like the excessive flood that we've just talked about. But programs such as Rural Development Community Facilities grants for better emergency shelters, and Rural Development Water and Waste Disposal loans and grants for rural water system upgrades, and NRCS Emergency Watershed Protection program to address the debris removal, the repairs to roads, culverts, and bridges, and the FSA loan for losses to crops, trees, livestock, and farmland. We're all familiar with a lot of those programs that have been extremely helpful. But would you just elaborate on some existing USDA programs where funding might be available today that we can give information to these farmers that could provide some short-term relief right now?
Well, the programs that may potentially provide that short-term relief have very little money left unobligated, and that's the challenge. It's only $1.8 million in one of the programs I'm thinking about right now that's unobligated, and that's the challenge, Senator. You've listed the programs that we have that would be available. Obviously, it takes some time to get through a community facility application process, although we'll do whatever we can to try to move that process as quickly as we can. I think your question, and I wish I had a better answer, but I do think it's a question that this committee needs to ask in a larger context. With a changing climate, we're seeing natural disasters that have greater consequences than ones we've been used to, where perhaps a program might have been easily available. The drought circumstance, for example, we used to deal with droughts that lasted for several months, maybe a year, but now we're dealing with droughts that are lasting multiple years. And I think we need to really think about the structure of our programs and the flexibility of our programs to be able to respond. I wish I had a better answer. I will tell you, we will challenge our staff to take a look and scour our programs, and we will get back to you with whatever we think is feasible and possible for a quick relief as we can provide. But unfortunately, some of these programs have been utilized already during this year, and there's very little money left.
Thank you. That would be most helpful. And I think I'm out of time for my other question. Thank you so much.
Senator Heinrich.
Secretary, welcome. I have been deeply concerned by the fact that recently a number of states have had to work to address what appear to be chronic wasting disease outbreaks or contaminations in the wild, resulting from outbreaks originating in captive breeding facilities. So I want to ask you what steps the department is taking, one, to prevent this from reoccurring, and are you considering convening an emergency meeting of the CWD Interagency Task Force?
Senator, I don't know the answer to the second question. I'd be happy to check on that, but I will tell you that our budget does contain additional resources under the APHIS budget for chronic wasting disease and the research that's involved in that and the treatment that's involved. So it is an area that we are aware, and it's an area that is a specific focus of APHIS.
I would urge you to consider convening that task force because the potential impacts here are enormous and could have literally permanent impacts on the ability and the rates of hunting in communities where this has occurred. I know you know a little bit, Secretary, about acequias. For my colleagues, they are many centuries-old irrigation structures that serve as the primary method of irrigation in many communities in New Mexico. And they're really a central part of New Mexico's cultural identity. So I want to thank you, first off, for your work to pause last year's policy change on NAP payments, which had stopped covering drought claims on acequia irrigated lands. While this temporary pause has provided some very much needed relief to our farmers, especially given the current drought, I think they need an assurance that FSA's administration of the program is going to remain consistent into the future. So moving forward, what is the department doing to ensure that drought impacts on acequia irrigated lands remain an eligible loss for NAP payments?
Senator, let me check on that. I think we have made an effort to try to get that resolved, and it doesn't make sense to get it resolved and then have it pop up again. So it does seem to make sense that it would be a consistent policy from this point forward. But I want to double check and make sure that I'm offering you accurate information about that. I would also point out that we continue to look for ways to provide help and assistance with drought-related issues. I mentioned earlier the EQIP program has announced a drought an effort of around $40 million that might be of some help.
Thank you for your attention to that. All of these things are sort of interconnected. Obviously, you heard from the senator from Mississippi about the level of impact from some of these extreme weather events that are associated with climate change. I've quit using the word drought. I now call it aridification because we are in such a permanent change of precipitation in the state of New Mexico that we're struggling with how to live with not just a little less, but a lot less. So one of the things I've done is recently I partnered with Congressman Pingree in the House to introduce the Agricultural Resilience Act. The bill would expand voluntary USDA conservation programs, bolster some new and existing state soil health programs like the Healthy Soils Program in New Mexico, boost USDA climate research, and increase investments on-farm renewable energy. Do you think that these efforts would help our farmers meet the goal of net zero emissions in agriculture while also potentially helping them just become more resilient to the kind of extreme weather events that we're seeing?
I do, Senator, and that's why we're basically encouraging NRCS to focus its programs, its existing programs, and any increases to those programs on the 45 practices that we know are climate smart to be able to enhance and encourage. And I think part of the challenge, of course, is that we want to make sure that farmers receive credit for the work that they're doing and acknowledge that there's a financial cost associated with these steps, and we want to be a partner.
And I assume programs like EQIP that you mentioned are really critical to
EQIP, CSP, CREP, CRP, all of the programs that we have are really designed in part and should be designed to encourage climate smart agricultural practices and soil health initiatives.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Heinrich. Senator Braun.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I kind of come from the farming community in the sense that I can still stay involved with it when I go home on the weekends, and I know that farmers in general are loving the fact that there's profit back in the marketplace. Along with that concern, though, is that input costs seem to mysteriously go up whenever farmers' kind of commodity prices go up, the way they make their income. Are you concerned that within the ag community, the farming side of it, that we've got issues of too much concentration within the supply side that farmers have to deal with? I mean, now I know that just versus 15 years ago, it's 2 to 3 times the cost on variable inputs to put out an acre of soybeans and or corn. Heightens the risk of an already risky enterprise. So what is your viewpoint, like in many other sectors of our economy? Is it a problem, or can we let that keep extending itself into the future?
Well, I had said earlier that nearly 90% of our farms today don't generate the majority of farm income for the farm families that operate them. And so I would say that there are a number of reasons why that percentage is as high as it is, which is disturbing to me. And it's something that I think involves 2 things. One, more new and better markets, but also taking a look at ways in which input costs are reasonable and that there is not a concentration of too few people supplying those inputs that encourages then them to be able to charge significant resources. I would say also, and I think you and I have had this conversation before, as we look at the patent laws, especially on seed technology, for example, the question is whether or not it is discouraging additional competition by virtue of how much time we give. And in this day and age of enormous and rapid change, we ought to be taking a look at those issues, I think, to figure out ways in which we can moderate those increases so that farmers have a chance of making more from their farm, so we don't have 90% of our farms not making the majority of income from farming.
So I don't think the phenomenon is limited to agriculture. I think it's evident in big healthcare as well. Fewer and fewer corporations seem to control the marketplaces of especially hospitals. Maybe pharmacies got a little breadth to it, but insurance companies, that doesn't seem to be getting any better as well. I view doctors and nurses as being kind of practitioners in an analogous way, other than farmers have just a much riskier way of making ends meet to run their enterprises. So I think that's something we need to be aware of, and rather than just observing that it's happening, be interested in hearing some real solutions that we could put into place. And I think it could be used then in other sectors of our economy that I think suffer from the same kind of trend over time.
Well, our focus certainly on the processing side is to figure out more capacity and more competition. I would say that we also have to change our thought process here a little bit to suggest that it's not just about efficiency in the market, it's also about resilience. And if you have too much concentration, you may have a very efficient system, but you may have a very one that's not particularly resilient. And I think we saw that during the pandemic.
The total budget request is going up by what percentage over last year?
It's 14%, 56% increase in programming, and the other 44% is basically not rescinding, which we traditionally have done in the WIC program, WIC rescissions.
So the economy will struggle to grow by 2%, and I'm worried that in general, with higher regulations and some of the things that we might be changing, that we're really working closer to that 3% growth in GDP. But when anything is going up by 14% relative to a baseline of our general economy, where our revenues come from to pay for anything, obviously we're borrowing a lot of money to support any of the things that we try to do through this place. How do we reconcile that in the long run without running into some big crisis?
I'd be interested in looking at the numbers over since I left the job to where we are today, because my guess is not much growth in the budget. So in a sense, we're adjusting to the fact that for many years we probably didn't receive a significant increase. In fact, we probably saw a cut. And that has reflected itself significantly, I think, in the number of people working at USDA. And so when people say we want you to get things done immediately, well, that's great. We're happy to do it, but you got to have people to do it. And we saw a significant reduction in workforce to the point, Senator, that we got people working 2 and 3 jobs at a time.
You know, and I'd reflect that point of view as well, especially since I'm really concerned about agriculture. But I'd note that in no other areas across our federal government does it look like we're offsetting that kind of extra normal increase to maybe take care of a good need within a certain part of it. And I think that comes home to roost sooner or later, and we need to be honest about it.
I don't want to get in between myself and my colleagues in the Senate, but or the cabinet. But look, I think here's what I would say. And just use one example. We have had phenomenal research in the health area and phenomenal increases in health research compared to the small amount of research dollars that go into agriculture. And the reality is that has to be addressed in some way. We have got to invest more in our research on agriculture if we're going to be able to adapt and mitigate to a changing climate and to all the issues we've talked about here. That's why our budget includes additional resources, and the President's American Jobs Plan involves additional resources. That's one example.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Braun. I'm going to start a second round. Secretary Vilsack, I was encouraged to see a real focus towards climate hubs in the President's budget. I wonder if you can briefly describe how you envision these climate hubs working across agencies and how the increased funding will provide more opportunities for American farmers and forest landowners.
Well, there are a couple of ways in which these, first of all, the hubs were established to do an assessment of the state of play relative to climate and agriculture and forestry, and then to begin the process of identifying ways in which regions of the country could adapt and mitigate the consequences of a changing climate. I think now what we have is the need for us to extend the knowledge and information. So what you will see is an opportunity for us to from NRCS, for example, with the climate hub assistance, to take a look at not just an individual state, but an individual region, to come up with a larger scale strategy, if you will, for the region on working lands, and to be able to finance adaptation projects that have been identified by the hubs. On the research side, I think the reality is we need more young people to be engaged in all aspects of agriculture and food production, but the Climate Hub resources for ARS could potentially sponsor fellowships to bring more researchers and more young people into this process. And we obviously need more data. This is going to be very much a data-driven response to a very challenging circumstance. So to the extent the climate hubs have additional resources, that means additional data collection. I mean, I remember being in a field in Iowa and looking at a device that was in this field, and it was essentially monitoring on a real-time basis the amount of oxygen, CO2, et cetera, and that information becomes critically important to the research that goes into how do we change photosynthesis to a point where we are embracing more carbon. How are we storing more carbon in the root systems? How are we increasing soil health, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera?
Great. Likewise, tell me a little bit more about details on the Civilian Climate Corps proposed in the budget and how they would interact with the hubs and how you see the harmony of the president's executive order dealing with tackling the climate crisis at home and abroad.
Well, this is similar to the Civilian Conservation Corps that we are already functioning at USDA. And I think the Climate Corps gives us the capacity not only to address the challenges in our forests, which the Civilian Conservation Corps has been able to address, but to begin the process of extending the workforce, extending the hands, if you will, to assist and help not only in rural areas, but also in urban centers as well. We're seeing a lot of interest in urban agriculture, and to the extent that we've got a Civilian Climate Corps, we can embrace that core, if you will, in assisting in expansion of urban agriculture, which is, I think, important in a number of major cities. You're seeing an onset of that. So that's one example of something that could be done. I think there is a need for education. There's going to be an opportunity for us to talk about a lot of different climate-smart agricultural practices, and as good as NRCS is, as good as our extension service is, these young people could also work with conservation districts at the local level to basically make sure that information was being supplied to producers so that they knew exactly not only what to do, but also where resources could be obtained to be able to do them.
Great. Thank you for that. At the beginning of the year, over 430,000 Wisconsinites, predominantly in rural areas of Wisconsin, lacked access to high-speed internet. Approximately 25% of Wisconsin's rural population still lacks sufficient internet access. I was this past weekend in a rural part of northern Wisconsin where there was very little cell or broadband access. So how does the USDA's fiscal year budget request address expanding broadband access to rural America, and how are you coordinating with other agencies in the federal government that play a role in broadband deployment?
Roughly 64% of America has access. I mean, you're going to see maps from some of the private sector folks who tell you that there's a 90% coverage, but the reality is about 64% of America has adequate access. That means that a large part of America does not. We have two real key efforts. Our traditional broadband program basically provides additional resources to establish systems, and then our Reconnect program is really designed to provide assistance and help to upgrade those systems so that they actually provide real service as opposed to sort of service on paper. We looked at the Reconnect program, and we knew that there were some issues and some concerns with it. So in the third round of funding from previous resources, we looked at ways in which we could better use those resources to create better speeds and to better coordinate with existing other government programs, the Commerce Department and other programs. So we have a significant increase in the budget for Reconnect and a slight increase for the traditional program. And let me just simply say, with all due respect to this committee, you're doing your best, but frankly, it will take many, many, many years of you doing your best to actually get the job done. I really think at some point in time, we as a country need to fish or cut bait on this and actually put some serious resources behind this effort. The American Jobs Plan, I think, is an effort to do that. That's the kind of money we're talking about. And until we get to that kind of commitment, you're going to be asking this question of me for the next 4 years, and people like me for the next fill in the blank years. So we're doing our best within the budget constraints that we have, but the reality is there's a need for a significantly greater sum. And we can't, the private sector's fine, but the reality is they're just not going to do the job in these rural, remote areas because they can't make the business case. And that's fair. That's absolutely fair. So that's why government has, I think, an oversized role to play in this particular area. And if we don't, then we basically got two classes of citizens here. And if I was a small business guy or a farmer in those rural, remote areas, I wouldn't be very happy about that.
That's right. Thank you so much. Senator Hoeven.
Yeah, Mr. Secretary, you're right about that as far as making the business case. You just can't in some of those. It's kind of like roads. You need them everywhere, but obviously the volume of traffic is vastly different and creates different economics. So, your analysis there is good. How do we, on the CO2 effort, make sure that it's farmer-friendly and we don't get any kind of one-size-fits-all or mandatory requirement?
Well, we're in the process of listening, Senator, and many of the points you just raised, we've identified the problems with the existing carbon markets. Scale, a farmer might be able to sequester 10 tons of carbon or maybe 100 tons of carbon, but the reality is we're talking about millions of tons. So a lot of these current carbon markets really don't address the scale issue. There are tremendous costs associated with the current existing markets, and the price that is paid doesn't justify the hassle and the cost. So the individual markets that exist today simply do not work for farmers. So if we're going to do something, we really have to specifically design and structure it for farmers and producers. And I think we can do that. If we allow aggregation, allow folks to aggregate their activities, if we reduce the paperwork and the hassle associated with participating, if we price it in a way that actually makes sense economically for farmers to participate, and if we structure it in a way that it is the farmer that benefits at the end of the day in two ways. One, being compensated for the carbon, but also, Senator, I think this is the most important aspect of this, that the market is demanding. The market wants to know where our food comes from, and they want to know how sustainably produced it is. And there's a premium associated with that. Mm-hmm. And it seems to me the farmer should be the one that captures that premium. So you get the credit and the premium.
Well, and therein lies some of my concern about, not making this a mandatory program and also making sure that we have the variety and flexibility that's going to work. If I'm a farmer in Iowa, I might grow corn and soybeans, and I don't have to till, and I might do that year in and year out. If I'm a farmer in the Red River Valley in North Dakota, I might have sugar beets or potatoes in that mix where I have to till. Totally different ballgame for the rancher as well, small grain farmer. again, back to that diversity in agriculture, and I know you understand it, but for somebody that just wants a carbon program, they might say, no, I just want the carbon sequestered and everybody has to do it like this, and that would be a real problem for agriculture.
It can't be one size fits all. It cannot be mandatory. It's got to be voluntary. And it also has to figure out a way of not rewarding latecomers at the expense of those who are early adopters. I mean, all of these issues have to be addressed.
So that's right on. I mean, what you said, that to me is right on if we're going to accomplish
That's what we're focusing on.
The other thing I want to explore for just a minute is the RISE program. You just announced that the application process is opening for the Rural Innovation Stronger Economy program. This is about advancing precision ag. This goes back to your opening comments about research and development. I'm a huge fan of our land-grant universities, the research and development they're doing. It's done so much for agriculture. This RISE program is really focused at precision ag. In North Dakota, we have a project called Grand Farm, and I would dearly love for you to come see it. I think you would. I know you're a fan of precision ag. It's the kind of thing that I think is remarkable, and so I would A, invite you to come, and B, I would really encourage you with that RISE program, to keep that moving and get that funding out. We funded it now for several years. We'll continue to fund it. But just your thoughts both on coming to Grand Farms, keeping that RISE program moving, and anything else we can do to help with precision ag.
Well, happy to take a trip up to North Dakota at some point in time, Senator. Did the last time I had this job, and happy to do it again.
We appreciate it.
Which means that I'm going to say yes to Kansas and Mississippi. I got that figured out. And on the RISE program, obviously we included it in our budget. We'll continue to include it in the budget. We see the benefit to it. We'll try to get those resources out quickly.
Good. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Hoeven. Senator Moran.
Thank you. Mr. Secretary, you should be pleased that you are wanted, your company is wanted, and I would remind you that you've already accepted my invitation. Yeah. We just need to fulfill that acceptance. Let me talk a moment about National Agricultural Statistics Service, NASS. I think it's a fair statement to say that many farmers and grain traders have lost confidence in the estimates from NASS. And I certainly commend NASS. They've made a special effort now to work with American Farm Bureau and others in the agriculture community to modernize their data collection and their evaluation efforts. We need to see, in my view, real results from those discussions. Your budget request is for an additional $10 million for NASS, and I'm certainly willing to advocate for those dollars if you can convince me or confirm to me that the additional spending will get us to a place in which the numbers are considered to be accurate and meaningful.
Well, if it doesn't, then I'm not doing my job.
It's a good answer, and I look forward to having that conversation with you. Let me raise a couple of food items. The Food for Peace program has been an important one for our country. The budget request, in my view, doesn't reflect the priority of the importance of Food for Peace. This is a discretionary increase in spending in this budget of $2.6 billion, but the proposal is to reduce the funding for what I think is America's flagship program for feeding the world. Yet we know that there's a huge need for food assistance around the world. So what's the rationale for that reduction?
There's a corresponding increase in USAID's budget to be able to utilize those resources more quickly in the face of emergencies. It's about speeding up the ability to get help to people, and that's the reason for the transfer.
Well, Mr. Secretary, you know that causes a debate among those of us who are strong supporters for food aid. I'm one of those. I co-chair the Senate Hunger Caucus, and I've always been supportive of trying to find ways to get the aid there quickly, and including local markets. But when we reduce the amount of American-produced agriculture commodities that are utilized in food aid programs, we reduce the support and, in some ways, just the pride that takes place in American farmers providing food the actual things we grow in the United States. So I, of course, will be advocating for a right balance, which I look forward to working with you to find. I know it takes both, but it is disappointing to me to see the reduction in spending in Food for Peace. Let me raise one more food topic, and I would use this as I think this is, it's probably more complicated than I know how to ask the question, and I would reiterate my desire that you and I have an opportunity to meet. We agreed to do that when we visited back at confirmation time. We've made that request, and we haven't heard a response. So if you could encourage us to find, your team and my team, to find a time for us to get together in person and have a conversation. I would raise, when we do, the Bill Emerson Humanitarian Trust. It's underutilized as a tool in fighting global hunger. It's jointly administered by you and USAID. It has about $281 million that could be used to purchase U.S. commodities to supplement the Food for Peace program in emergency food situations. And it just, despite that unprecedented food crisis in recent years, including 4 famines or near famines, the trust has not been used to respond to an emergency since 2014. I've been down this path with your predecessor and would like to go down a path with you, with USAID and USDA, in figuring out what the perhaps technical challenges are in utilizing an important fund of money that goes unutilized.
It's a fair request, Senator.
Thank you. Madam Chair, thank you very much. Thank you, Secretary.
Thank you, Senator Moran. Senator Hyde-Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Mr. Secretary, I would just like to associate the comments, myself, with the comments of Senator Moran and Senator Tester on the cow-calf production transparency with the market. This has been going on for so many years. I am delighted to be here to see that we have a real opportunity for some correction here. And I know I've been pretty vocal about this issue for a very long time, but I'm excited to see this, and all we want is fairness. That is all we want. You really can't produce a cattle herd without some cowboys, and they're working very hard to be treated very unfairly for a very long time. So thank you for your efforts in this, and maybe coming out with a bill of some transparency for the cash market, that we can actually make the decisions based on real numbers, and for addressing the issues that we've had with the packers. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Senator Hyde-Smith. I am not going to do a third round of questioning, but I am feeling awfully badly that no one's asked Mr. Rapp a question. So I just wanted to ask you whether you can give us any updates on the reevaluation of the Thrifty Food Plan. That happens, or it's mandated by 2022. It serves as the basis for calculating SNAP benefits accurately, making sure they accurately reflect the cost of healthy, nutritious food. And so, can you update the committee on where the department is on that review, and when can we expect this update to be public?
I was going to pass that one to the secretary.
You may do that. I just didn't want you to feel left out.
No, I'm not feeling left out, but thank you.
Okay.
This is the first time in 45 years that this fundamental basis of the SNAP program has been reviewed. And as you know, Madam Chair, this basically involves taking a look at an average American family of 4, basically trying to determine what that family today and from a caloric intake is taking. And this is not what it should be, it's what it is. Mm-hmm. What kind of capacity they have in the grocery store to be able to shop the full grocery store, and what the cost would likely be if they did so. I anticipate and expect that we will have some information available this summer, because we need to make sure that states are aware of any adjustment that may take place by October 1st. So I think you can expect us to come out with the results of whatever that study is, and it's really complicated and a lot of data involved that needs to be churned sometime this summer, well in advance of that October 1st date.
Thank you very much. So I want to thank you, Secretary Vilsack and Mr. Rapp, for being here today. I think we had a very good discussion, and I look forward to working with you this year as we draft the fiscal year 2022 bill. I would announce for the committee, questions for the record are due by next Tuesday, June 15th. And with that, this hearing is adjourned.
Hey, Senator.
In Kansas, FSA tells us that the offices are